Polls show that the Liberals are trending down, the Conservatives are trending up, and that means that Justin Trudeau and company are resorting to flat-out lies and desperation. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Now, I may not agree with many of the policies being put forth by Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. I wish he was more conservative. I wish he would differentiate himself more from the Liberals in terms of policy, and I wish that he would take on more of the cultural battles. He may not be my brand of conservative, but there's one thing that I cannot deny. Erin O'Toole is running one hell of a campaign. He's incredibly disciplined. He isn't falling into any of the traps that the Liberals have set up, be it on COVID vaccines, reconciliation, climate, healthcare, or social policy. All of the typical things that the Liberals and their friends in the media use to attack and demonize conservatives, well, O'Toole has avoided, skillfully. And he's being rewarded in the polls, big time. 338 Canada is a poll aggregator. It takes all of the credible polls that have been done over a certain period of time and looks at the averages. So on August 13th, 338 Canada had the odds of Justin Trudeau winning a majority government at about 58%. But just 9 days later, by August 22nd, its projections showed the odds of Trudeau winning majority down to 22%. Likewise, on August 13th, they had the odds of the Conservative Party winning a minority government at only about 1.2%. No wonder Justin Trudeau triggered the election. But now, that same polling aggregator, 338, has the odds of a Conservative minority at 20.8%. Now, let's look at the specific polls that True North is tracking. This is the one that's making a lot of headlines right now, an ECOS poll. So ECOS asks, how do you plan to vote in the upcoming federal election? When they asked that question on August 15th, 31% said Conservative and 35% said Liberal. Well, when they asked again over the weekend on August 21st, 33% said Conservative and only 32% said Liberals. Yes, the Conservatives are winning according to that poll. And that ECOS poll is not an outlier. Check out the shift in Nanos's polling. Nanos Research asks, for those parties you would consider voting for, please rank your top two choices. So on July 30th, the Liberals were up by 6 points. The Liberals had about 32% and the Conservatives only had about 25.5%. On August 22nd, the Liberals are basically only up by the margin of error, Conservatives at 31.4% and the Conservatives at 32.5%. Now, this of course is all because Justin Trudeau had a very bad first week on the campaign trail. First, he triggered the election mere hours after Kabul in Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. This intensified the impression that Justin Trudeau is selfish, unserious, arrogant, and an opportunist. His decision to host this vanity election, juxtaposed with all of those chaotic images out of Kabul, and the mere fact that there were Canadians, as well as those who risked their lives and their families to help Canada, left behind, was unconscionable. Not to mention the fact that Trudeau flip-flopped over whether or not he would recognize the Taliban as the official government of Afghanistan. Next, Trudeau's entire campaign gamble was predicated on the wedge issue of mandatory vaccines. The Liberal Brain Trust wagered Trudeau's minority government on the assumption that the Conservatives would oppose forced vaccinations for civil servants and federally regulated industries. But O'Toole called him on his bluff and adopted more or less the exact same position as the Liberals. O'Toole said he supported mandatory vaccines, but also said that Canadians have the right to determine their own health choices. He instead suggested making alternative measures for those who fail to get vaccinated, including masking and testing. Now, Trudeau dishonestly tried to push the idea that O'Toole's position was meaningfully different, but it wasn't. It just wasn't. Basically, their position is the exact same, and even the bailout media caught on to that. Robin Urbach over at the Globe and Mail called out the CBC on Twitter that the CBC was the only media outlet that was trying to push the Liberal spin, that the positions were different. They weren't. Robin called CBC out on Twitter twice for misleading Canadians by saying that their position was different. And Chris Selly over at the National Post explained it perfectly, so I'm going to read from his article that he wrote last week. Here we go. It says, "It was a classic Liberal wedge issue, albeit even more cynical than usual considering the topic, and it seemed to be going to plan. But the wedge had lost considerable structural integrity on Monday. Whenever governments talk about mandatory vaccination, even for healthcare workers and nurses, the union's reaction is central. After the mandatory vaccine policy became official on Friday, the Public Service Alliance of Canada, also known as PSAC, wasted no time demanding the government provide accommodation for workers who cannot be vaccinated for reasons protected under human rights legislation, including health concerns and presumably religious ones as well. This planted a seed of doubt. How mandatory would mandatory really be? Canada's Chief Human Resources Officer, Christine Donoghue, answered that in a memo to deputy ministers published on the Treasury Board Secretariat's website. For those who refuse vaccination, we will need to consider alternative measures such as testing and screening, it said. O'Toole's basic position, in other words. Whoops. This is all still from Chris Selly's piece, which is really good. So here we go. In theory, Justin Trudeau could have accepted that mandatory didn't mean literally everyone, but that it was nonetheless a worthwhile policy. Instead, he insists still that a vast gulf lies between his virtuous position and that irresponsible Claude O'Toole's. That boat might have floated had Donoghue's memo not vanished from the web as quickly as it appeared. The Treasury Board Secretariat and the Liberals insist that's because the information was inaccurate. But it's beyond suspicious. Reporters smell political interference and a potential violation of the Caretaker Convention that binds government civil servant relations during campaigns. And that is when the media caught on and intensified its questions against Justin Trudeau. So this is a final part from Chris Selly's piece. He writes, "Are you just playing with words to score points?" one reporter asked Trudeau in Markham, Ontario on Tuesday. "Do you think it's responsible to turn vaccines into a wedge issue?" asked another. So in other words, the media, that is aside from the CBC, most members of the media have not bought into this wedge issue, have not bought into the idea that Trudeau and O'Toole's position are meaningfully different. And look, if Trudeau has lost the media after giving billions and billions and billions of dollars to the media, then he is in serious trouble. And that's why we've seen the Liberals crank up the spin, the deception, and the misinformation about Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives. So over the weekend, the Liberals turned to its old, tried and true favorite methods of fear-mongering against the Conservatives. First, they said that the Conservatives have a hidden agenda to ban abortions. And second, they said that the Conservatives have a hidden agenda to privatize healthcare. We've seen this movie before. We've seen this movie 1,000 times before. We've seen it for decades. We've seen it so often that it has lost all meaning. And unfortunately for the Liberals, the Conservatives are running a candidate in this election campaign that simply does not live up to the Liberal boogeyman status. Erin O'Toole is just as pro-abortion as Justin Trudeau. Again, there isn't a meaningful distinction in their policy. Here is what Erin O'Toole said on August 19th.
But let me be perfectly clear. As a pro-choice leader of this party, I will make sure that we defend the rights of women to make the choice for themselves with respect to their own health.
And on the exact same day, this is what Justin Trudeau said.
I think it's clear that there's something fundamental that Erin O'Toole doesn't understand. Pro-choice doesn't mean the freedom of doctors to choose. It means the freedom of women to choose. Leaders have to be unequivocal on that, and once again, Erin O'Toole is not, and he's saying certain things to some people and it's opposite to others. That's not good enough.
Rachel Aiello, CTV News. You're attacking the Conservatives today over their position on conscience rights. However, in your legislation on assisted dying, you protected doctors' freedom of choice of conscience. If the concern now is doctor referrals, why haven't you and would a Liberal government move legislation to further enshrine abortion rights?
I think it's very clear that the Conservative Party once again doesn't understand what pro-choice actually means. Pro-choice isn't the power for doctors to choose. It's the power for women to choose. And that is what we are going to continue to defend unequivocally. And quite frankly, the Conservatives have demonstrated time and time again that they will not.
Again, there is no meaningful difference in their policy, and yet Trudeau is out there saying the exact opposite, and he had his Minister for the Status of Women, an Afghan refugee no less, unleash this deranged and untrue tirade on Twitter, alleging that O'Toole is secretly against abortion. Now, I won't read through this entire thread because really it's just the same and you know exactly what it says. None of it is true. And she was called out on Twitter over and over again, accused of lying, fear-mongering, pushing hate and division, and perhaps most damning, neglecting to talk about the civil war and terrorism takeover in her country, in Afghanistan, and instead being pushed out to push this trite and tired storyline. It's all very sad. But that wasn't it for the Liberals or for Trudeau making the ladies in his cabinet do his dirty work. Next, he had Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, the deputy prime minister, the former foreign affairs minister, a Harvard grad, and a once respected person, a respected journalist. He had her stoop even lower by pushing out a manipulated video to twist O'Toole's position on healthcare. Freeland tweeted out this video, which as you can see is just very clearly deceptively edited. It's full of choppy jump cuts, making it painfully obvious how fake it is. Here's the clip.
Would you be prepared to allow provinces to experiment with real healthcare reform, including the provision of private, for-profit, and non-profit healthcare options inside of universal coverage?
Yes. Now I'll elaborate a little bit more. We can't have just one old model that is increasingly becoming inefficient, and we have to find public-private synergies, and that capital will come in to drive efficiencies. I've run on this for several years now.
So it's deceptively edited. You can tell that right away. And rightly, Twitter put a warning label on this tweet and on this video to warn viewers that it had been deceptively edited. Think about it. The Liberal Party has, for months, been pushing and defending Orwellian legislation that will censor what you can say and what you can see online. They want that power. They want the power to determine what you can say and what you can see. They want to take that power away from Silicon Valley tech firms like Twitter and give it to Liberal staffers in the Prime Minister's office. The same Liberal staffers who have just been caught pushing fake information and spreading a manipulated, dishonest video on Twitter. And they had the finance minister, the deputy prime minister, no less, be the one to push it out. This is irony at its best, and it's also peak Liberal hypocrisy. All of which, of course, is lost on the Liberals, who gleefully continue to push their fake wedge issue. Freeland was so pumped about her deceptive tweet that she doubled down on it during a campaign event. Let's see what that looked like.
Had we not won the 2019 election, I wake up in a cold sweat thinking about that. Do you think the Conservatives would have provided the support to individuals and to businesses that we did? Do you think they would have bought the vaccines that we did? No. I don't think so. And so it really, really matters. And it matters for the future. We put out, I think we put this out already. If not, you guys are going to get the scoop on the rest of the country. But we tweeted out some video of Erin O'Toole during the Conservative leadership campaign where he talks about privatizing Medicare. Can you believe that?
But again, here's a problem. It isn't true. So let's go back to Freeland's deceptive editing, and I will show you the full clip of what Erin O'Toole actually said with all its context. Here is that clip.
Now I'll elaborate a little bit more. I refer to my previous leadership quite regularly. Our team now calls that the warm-up because we're going to win this one. But I also ran on this principle, Kate, because if we're expecting innovation and more choice and better performance, we can't have just one old model that is increasingly becoming inefficient because of the amazing new drugs that are dragging some of the funds into other areas in our healthcare system, especially biologics, which the Trudeau government also messed up in terms of the NAFTA negotiations. If we want to see that innovation, we have to find public-private synergies and make sure that universal access remains paramount. And I actually praised what Brad Wall did with respect to diagnostic imaging, because he's actually making sure that wait times for everyone go down as a result of the investment by the private sector to make sure there are more diagnostic imaging machines. I thought that was a brilliant move to show the public at large There's going to be an overall benefit because everyone's wait times will go down, but people will be able to access services, and that capital will come in to drive efficiencies, drive innovation. In fact, there was a decision in Quebec, the Charuli decision, that says it's a right for Canadians. Now, because it was a civil code, not everyone applies it across the country. It is certainly, if the same issue came to the Supreme Court, there's no way they could say the state can prevent people, as you said, the communist China example. So let's try and do it in a way that's fair, measured, and keep the public with us. I've run on this for several years now, and I do think in the 905, my region, people are open to it, provided we don't let the Liberals define us. We have to have someone that can defend these principles and these ideas. And I think in this race, I'm the only one who can.
Now, as you can see, he's not talking about privatizing healthcare. He's talking about improving healthcare through competition, through more choice within the universal framework. Isn't it funny, by the way, how the Liberals claim to be pro-choice when it comes to abortion, but all of a sudden they hate choice when it comes to the broader healthcare system? It's my body, my choice when it comes to one narrow example for women, but no choice whatsoever when it comes to vaccines, and no choice whatsoever when it comes to getting a second opinion when it comes to healthcare. Now look, even the tech overlords in the Silicon Valley slapping a warning label on Freeland's tweet and video, warning the viewer that it isn't true, well, that didn't stop Justin Trudeau from again doubling down, tripling down at this point onto this Liberal spin. Here's Justin Trudeau. Watch how worked up he is. He knows he's losing badly, and he is obviously in panic mode. Here's that clip.
In the pandemic, came out clearly in favor of a private, for-profit healthcare system for Canada. Shame on you. In a pandemic, no less. He was talking about this when the stories of this pandemic were how vulnerable people are made more vulnerable in a health crisis like this that we have to continue to step up for. And he's saying, no. I've always believed in a for-profit healthcare system. We need to ensure better access for wealthy people who can skip the queue and move forward quickly. Well, that is wrong.
Trudeau is not telling the truth. The reality is that increasing public funding to our government-run public healthcare is the biggest ticket item in Erin O'Toole's election platform. He has pledged to add an additional $60 million to increase healthcare funding within the government system. That's literally the opposite of what Trudeau and the Liberals are saying. But the Liberals are desperate. They're losing any hope they may have at a majority government, and they may just lose this entire election. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.